Welcome to this briefing of the Jerusalem Press Club, JPC, another one in the series, Israel is Alive and Kicking. We have been running for the international press since the beginning of the coronavirus crisis. Today we host Dr. Shira Efron, who will speak about Israeli trade between China and the US. Shira Efron is a visiting fellow of the Institute for National Security Studies, INSS, in Israel. In parallel, she's a special advisor on Israel with the RAND Corporation, where in 2017 she founded a unique research program dedicated to Israel. She has PhD in policy analysis from RAND, graduate school, an MA International Relations from NYU, and BSc in biology and computer science from Tel Aviv University. She's a member of the board of directors of the Bora Forum, which promotes women in the security establishment, and fellow with the Israeli Policy Forum. Welcome, thanks for being with us. Why don't you start with a short introduction, then we'll move to Q&A.
Thank you, Uri, and good morning, and thank you all for joining us. I know there are different things going on in Israel and around the world, and I hope you're all safe and healthy and that your families are okay as well. I'd rather respond to questions, of course, so we can make this dynamic, and feel free to barge in if you want. We are going to talk about this Israel's attempt to walk a delicate balance between the US and China, something that's becoming much harder, but you didn't have to have a sort of a glass ball to anticipate this. This was coming a long time in the making. Briefly about it, I assume you all follow the US-China competition. The United States identified China as a peer competitor, a rival. Like it had no competitor like this before. Even the Soviet Union was very different, and that did not start with the Trump administration. The Obama administration pivoted to Asia because they identified the China challenge as the one thing that is likely to challenge the U.S. Hegemony. It's freedom of movement, freedom of action around the world. It's a technological and economic primacy. So it didn't start with the Trump administration. However, the Trump administration does have its unique style. And I think that we did not anticipate how quickly from number one competitor, China would become a rival. And I just don't have any other word to describe the war of words. Some people say it's a new Cold War, but it is a rivalry between Washington and Beijing. If you're interested, Uri can share it, that the U.S. government just came out with a new strategic document they call Strategic Approach on China. It builds on the National Defense Strategy from 2017, but it's much more sentimental. I think 2/3 of the document speaks about, values. There's a sense of betrayal. We opened the free world to you, the Chinese, and you did not follow the rules. You misbehaved. So it feels much more emotional now than just about the actual facts, but that does not really matter. This type of conversation is bipartisan. Again, I think this White House has a very unique style of doing things, but it is really bipartisan. So if Biden is elected in November, I don't think fundamentally the issues are going to change. And even more so, what the liberals in the United States see as very concerning is China's human rights records, treatment of Uyghurs, lacking a better term, it's concentration camps where 3 million people are locked in, and other censorship concerns. So we're going to see more of this in the future. Where does it meet Israel? When I speak to U.S. officials and also across both sides, the idea is that this is such a strong partnership. It's still bipartisan. There's strong support for Israel in the United States. There's intelligence sharing. Israel's just maybe tier 2 after the Five Eye, which is a unique club of Anglo states that have partnership with Israel. But maybe Israel even can join the Five Eye one day. If there's one thing, and these officials are saying, if there's one thing that can drive Israel and the United States apart, is China. Israel's ties with China. And I can give you an example. It was earlier this year, in late 2019, the Haifa port issue found itself in the National Defense Authorization Act. It is a big national defense bill in Washington. The senator that put it in the bill, that ended up not making it to the final draft, is Tom Cotton. He is a good friend of Israel, but he put the Haifa port in there, saying that Israel should be careful and should address U.S. concerns. So this is just an example. The most recent obvious example we saw was 2 weeks ago, about 2.5 weeks ago. Secretary Pompeo visited Israel, and reportedly the China issue was maybe, if not number 1 item on the agenda, at least number 2. And the U.S.'s message was stern about a desal plan. And there are risks about desalination plant. We can talk about it. It's strategic infrastructure. But I think more than this was a test case for how much is Israel addressing U.S. concerns. As you all probably know, the decision about the Sorek was determined by sheer luck. It was cost. All the tender documents have already been revealed before. The one thing was the price. They opened the envelopes, and I think breathed a sigh of relief, because the Hutchison, the Chinese based in Hong Kong company, bid was higher. It was less competitive. And so the competitors were awarded the building and operating the desal plant.
Shira, let me just interject. I mean, based on your invitation to kick in questions, just hypothesize what would have happened if Hutchison would have won.
So I think this would have caused a big headache. It's my assessment that after Pompeo's visit and after the strong messages that came from Washington, the state of Israel would have exercised its authority, and it has the authority to rule against the cost consideration of a tender and award it to the competitors anyway. That would have caused a lot of problems, though, because, first of all, it's water that Israeli citizens and residents pay for. So this is a big thing. Second, it would have made the case explaining to Hutchison and to the Chinese government that there were other considerations. I think it was really, but I have a feeling that that Israel wouldn't have been able to award the tender, even if it was more competitive. So it's a good question, but this is where I stand on this. Yes, please.
Okay, so we jumped straight into the actual situation, but the Chinese interests here are part of a big plan. I think the Belt and Road Initiative, adopted in 2013 by the Chinese government, which everything they do here is part of a grand scheme, isn't it?
So, yes and no. Absolutely. In China's framing, they started with infrastructure projects even before they called it Belt and Road Initiative, and sort of every investment in infrastructure outside of its border is now part of the Belt and Road Initiative. And this is a thing they do also in Israel. And Israel is a very unique case, I think, because if you look at China's patterns, they usually invest in infrastructure primarily in developing countries and in technology in developed countries. In Israel, it does both. The primary interest that China has in Israel, there is infrastructure, but it's more than that, it's the technology piece. it's the innovation. That's why when Netanyahu, I think it was in 2017, after his second or third visit in Beijing, I came back, he said China is interested in three things: technology, technology, technology. There's an innovation partnership that involves 13 ministries on the Israeli side. Who knows, maybe there'll be more ministries now. The Israeli government now has lots of ministries, but it's innovation and technology. So, you know, infrastructure is good. Israel can be an important node between Asia and Europe, and it's a stable place. So it makes sense to invest in ports and in rail. But I would argue that this is not the main interest that China has in Israel.
Let's talk about a connection between commercial or interest or business interest and politics. On one hand, there's this grand plan of investing in the Middle East, in roads, in sea lines, etc. And on the other hand, there's the political interest. And I think in your work at RAND, you said that the political interests of Israel and China are incompatible. So how does it work?
So on some things it is compatible and not. You know, Israel is making an effort to diversify its trading partners from Europe and the United States. It started in 2013. Europe is a difficult front for Israel with pressures from the BDS movement. The United States has become more protectionist. I think we're seeing more of this now, especially when those places are entering another economic recession. But you're right that China's interests in the Middle East are not aligned with those of Israel. China's, you know, they have Iran is a strategic partner. China does not recognize Hamas as a terror organization. Hezbollah, there's just a totally different set of values and considerations in the Middle East, driven by energy dependence. It's not that China gets a lot of energy from Iran, but Iran is the fallback option. If the Saudis and the Emiratis and all follow U.S. lead, and if the U.S. says to its allies in the Persian Gulf, don't let China, don't provide China with oil, China knows that Iran will. So this is what I believe is Iran's importance for it. But China has not voted with Israel even once at the UN. It's not that it abstains, it votes against Israel's interest in the UN. So politically, this is an issue, but Israel is trying to separate between the economic considerations and the political considerations, saying, you know, this is the fastest growing economy. It's the second largest economy in the world. Everyone wants investments from China. And I think what we cautioned about in the RAND reports was that usually the investments, by the way, foreign investment always needs to be scrutinized in my view, but when it comes from Chinese companies that we know they have established links to the Chinese government, those investments comes with strings attached. And this is one of the things that we see as the grave risk when investing in critical infrastructure, which we're seeing in the Ashdod port, for instance. We mentioned Haifa port, Ramat Chovav is a power plant. There's a Chinese group that is competing. I think we will have the answer next week. Rumor has it that they're not going to win this one again based on cost, but it's all rumors. This company also is the company that builds the Ashdod port. It's associated with a company that is involved in reclamation of islands in the South China Sea, something the United States cares about very much. And also it built a satellite station in Argentina that is suspected to be an intelligence collection station for the Chinese, the People's Liberation Army. So this is a real risk that you're pointing at.
You know, you're talking about Israel trying to dissociate between political and business interests, but we just see with the Pompeo visit that it's not so easy. If you were an advisor to Prime Minister Netanyahu, how would you advise him to walk this thin line?
I think there are two main pieces of advice that I would give. That first of all, we see that COVID-19 crisis only exacerbated tensions between the US and China, and I wouldn't risk it. Desal plant, what's the big deal? It is a big deal. Israel and China have been negotiating for some time now a free trade agreement. I don't know what the status of this, but I would not rush into signing anything now, even though it has economic advantages for Israel. But it just the optics would not be good at this moment. Also, in terms of the innovation partnership, do you promote it now with the new government, or you lay low for a little bit? And I would lay low at least until the November election, because the November election we would have time to maybe reassess the strategy. We can't, the Trump administration's approach to China is also driven by the political considerations back home, deflecting attention. So I think it's important until then not to do anything in that regard. I think a more important strategy, a more important piece of advice, though, is Israel in October 2019, again, in response to US pressure, a caretaker government in Israel announced that it would establish a screening mechanism on foreign investments. You probably, the journalists on the line probably remember the announcement. It was a very vague announcement, but it's an advisory mechanism. It's voluntary. Regulators can approach the committee, but it can also not approach. They get advice. The advice is they can heed the advice. They can decide not to take the advice. It's not staffed regularly. I mean, there's no permanent staff to the committee. They have other jobs with the Ministry of Finance, Ministry of Foreign Affairs, and this they do on the side. And another thing, that they excluded all the technology sector from the from the committee's mandate. And I think this is why we're going to see more of this coming from the US. I would urge the Israeli government and the Prime Minister and the future Prime Minister, the new Defense Minister, the new Foreign Minister, the new Treasury to strengthen the mechanism. And there are concrete ways to do that. And to include investments in the technology sector in it, because I can say with certainty more US pressure is going to come around this issue.
You mentioned technology, and in the past, the main American concern was the leak of sensitive technologies to the Chinese. We all remember the Falcon case in the 1990s when under American pressure, Israel had to cancel the plan to sell to the Chinese airborne system, which, by the way, didn't stop the Americans to sell their AWACS to the Saudis, but never mind that. So in the past, it seemed to have been the focus on a leak of sensitive technology, but now it seems like it's everything Chinese.
Yes, so I'm not sure it's everything Chinese, but the United States has the most draconian investment screening mechanism. It's known as CFIUS, and in 2018 they amended it and strengthened it, and they added a list of what they call emerging and foundational technologies. And you pointed out correctly that it used to be sensitive technologies, military technologies, what we call the dual use, what can be used in military and also in commercial. What's now in the list of the emerging and foundational is, there are a lot of things in there. There's biotechnology, there's automation, there's artificial intelligence, there's cyber, and increasingly the line between pure commercial and dual use is becoming very blurry. And this is the issue. So from the United States perspective, and this is the official line, is that we're not talking about what we agreed in 2005 after the Falcon and the Harpy, what was dual use at the time. We're talking about the dual use of the future. And in that box, you put a lot of things. I still think that there's probably, there are probably areas where Israel can partner with China. It's true that there's some people in Washington that want to put everything in the red box and say, no, 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 you can't do anything Chinese. But I think on issues of water, there's room there. Food security is a big one. Medical and healthcare was fine until not long ago, but now the U.S. added it to its definition of national security. By the way, the Europeans and Canadians also, they call it medical security. And there are Chinese investments in Israeli medical companies, Meditech. So that could be an issue, but understanding from the U.S., and this may be a third piece of advice for the government, understanding from the US explicitly what their red lines are, and working in this allowed space is something that I think Israel should work on. Being ambiguous about it is just a recipe for trouble. Now we're really focusing on US concerns here, and Israel should do these things just not to upset the US. But I live in Israel now, and all of you here on the line that are Israel and Uli, for you, foreign investments, and Chinese investment in particular, but foreign investments in strategic infrastructure and key technology has risks for Israel. Opportunities, but also risks, and these have to be weighed in, even separate from the US considerations.
It seems that Donald Trump has made the China issue, or the war with trade war with China, one of his main vehicles for re-election. And it seems that maybe his phase one agreement, or maybe the only foreign policy success he had in the last year, is also at stake. So you see a sharpening of the line, and you see more pressures on Israel resulting from Trump's personal almost vendetta against China?
So I think the trade issue is one thing. The trade war was always the easy part between the US and China, because the big thing is that the United States sees the technology with China spanning across multiple levels. Trade is only one of them, but it's the simple one. It's the technology, it's the geopolitics, it's the military, and in those they don't have solutions. The trade agreement, the first stage, was supposed to be a kind of a ceasefire, but now we're seeing that because of COVID-19, it's probably not going to even get implemented. So even this one thing is not going to get implemented, not going to get us to stage 2, which was to begin with the hard part, talking about those other issues. A lot of it depends on how Israel will behave. And what Israel will do. And I think Israel sort of, there's a slap on the wrist. There was the whole press hoopla around Sorek too, which was a good reminder here that there are people watching Pompeo's visit. It was framed as if he came here for China. I don't think he came here to talk about China, but it was definitely a very important item on the agenda. So it depends. If Israel lays low in its relationship with China, if the new foreign minister maybe is eager to travel, maybe he's lucked out that no one's traveling now, I would postpone a trip to China now, postpone any other steps, and respond to U.S. pressure that is happening in back channels. And when it was happening in back channels, to strengthen the investment committee. I don't think Trump himself, I don't know what's going on in his, in his head, but I think a lot of people in the Trump administration, they're primarily interested now in re-election. Picking a fight for Israel with Israel is not necessarily a good thing for re-election, for a base that cares about other things. So I don't think there's an incentive really to do it before. But it's not just the White House. There's a whole bureaucracy that is geared toward looking at China as an opponent, as a strategic competitor, and they're watching not just Israel, other U.S. allies as well. But Israel is definitely an important one in this context.
No, it's very difficult to prophesize, especially about the future. But if you took a chance and looked into 10 years from now, 20 years from now, you see a situation in which China becomes more important to Israel because of the trade than the US?
I think if you look at the numbers, those are still not very big in terms of how much Israel imports and exports with China, and also Chinese investments. The main investment in Israel, main foreign investment, is European and American. And most of the Israeli technology companies and venture capitals would rather receive Western money, and those are mutually exclusive now. Hypothetically, you can think of a situation, even now, right? We talk about the COVID-19 crisis. We're seeing in the EU and in the US, there are talks about investing home, buy America, becoming more isolationist. So foreign investment is gonna be, might be in decline. Not just in Israel, foreign investments in general. Chinese foreign investment will also be in decline, but maybe relatively less so than the Americans. And then we will see the share growing. And you know, with growing economic relationship, there's going to come more leverage and more dependency. It also happens, you know, it also matters what China does, what other US allies do, what England does, what Germany does, what Australia does, what New Zealand does. There are many factors. And the question is how the United States approaches this competition. This is a challenge that the US cannot rise to alone. It pressures its allies to not partner with China, but what does it offer in return? What kind of access to US technology? What kind of 5G does the US have to offer at a compatible price to what China is offering now? So a lot of it, you know, there's so many factors. But, you know, there's an anecdote that an Israeli, very senior retired general told me, so it's not my story, but he said that he met with a group of Chinese military leaders, all with approval and the knowledge of the American, the US administration. It was a few years ago. And this Chinese official, one of the Chinese delegation, said at the end of the visit, he said, you know, you keep talking about the US, they're a strategic ally, we get it, but how long do you think they will be your strategic ally? How long will you need them? And this Israeli general asked, what do you mean? I mean, they're our strategic ally now. You talk about the future in Israel. We don't think long-term. Tomorrow is long-term for us. And this Chinese official said, no, we know that you have the Americans now, but in 50 years, you'll be now on our side. So, you know, I don't know if he's right, but
you're using a quote from the Chinese to answer my question. You think there's a question? Do you think there's a kind of blackmail, American blackmail on Israel? You can go ahead with annexation or applying the law as you want on one hand, but keep a distance from China on the other hand.
I don't think there's blackmail. I think the U.S. sees annexation, even though in Israel they're trying to separate the two. The U.S. sees the annexation as part of their peace and prosperity plan, and they are motivated to go ahead with this plan, even though, you know, we think it's a non-starter. But there could be a situation, and again, I wasn't in the room, so I don't know if this was used, but that people on the U.S. side that are passionate about the plan or passionate about the annexation part of the plan really want to make sure that China doesn't come in the way of it. So that could be it. So ensuring that the China stuff doesn't interfere with the annexation plan.
Last question is very specific. You talked about the Hutchison proposal. You know how much it was more expensive than the Israeli one. Can you give us the price of water of a cubic meter? If not, then or maybe you can refer us to who has the answer to that.
So it's a good question, which I asked myself. I have the Ministry of Treasury. They advertised in their announcement the price of the winner. I could not get a hold of the price of the competitor. It's not common maybe to advertise these things. Maybe here, and we can be suspicious that maybe it wasn't based on cost, and this is what they say. I don't think it was. I don't think that what happened here. I'm not a journalist. You might have better success. The Ministry of Treasury would probably, Ministry of Finance, the Treasury Department, they would have the answer to that. But it's not something that I could find online or through conversations with people that roam in those circles.
Dr. Efron, thank you so much for being with us and sharing with us your vast expertise on this issue. Stay tuned to our next webinar later today at 2 p.m. when we host Ayelet Shaked, former Justice Minister. And also tomorrow, 11 a.m., we'll be hosting Professor Gila Stopler, Professor of Law and former chair of the Association for Civil Rights in Israel, talking about the emergency coronavirus. Is it a necessity or breach of democracy? Thank you all for being with us. See you soon.